The GPS DairyCAST features the high-value insights of the GPS Dairy Consulting team's trusted advisors and the owners and managers from the elite dairy farms they serve. These conversations deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders.
Hello and welcome to the GPS DairyCAST. I'm Peggy Coffeen from the Uplevel Dairy Podcast, serving as your host, and we're coming to you from the 2023 GPS Leaders Forum. I'm joined by Paul Dyk, GPS Dairy Consultant, along with the 2023 summer intern, Chaiden Duitscher from Iowa State University. And Chaiden will share his findings from his summer internship, what he learned from visiting multiple dairies about feed-centered design. And join this conversation with Paul and Chaiden.
Hey Chaiden, good to see you again. It's great to have you at the GPS Leaders Forum. Appreciate you coming up from Iowa. It was great to have you this summer as our intern. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I grew up with my family's dairy farm in northwest Iowa before attending Iowa State University to get a dairy science degree. Spent a lot of time in the dairy science department there. And then this past fall, I started vet school at Iowa State University. And yeah, I had a project with GPS this summer focusing on feed center design as part of their Feed Fit program.
You went to a number of our great farms that we work with, our clients, and we've got a lot of information that you've given to us from those visits. I thought maybe it might be helpful just to talk about a couple of those things, maybe 2 or 3 ideas that you saw out in the dairies this summer, kind of give our clients a little more wisdom as to what you learned this summer. So maybe give me 2 or 3 ideas of things that you saw.
Yeah, so I guess 3 big things that we kind of talked about a lot this summer, had a lot of discussions about, and kind of spent a significant amount of time on would be, we talked about on-farm grinding a lot with on-farm corn processing. We also talked about stationary mixers a fair amount, and some of these newer big feed center setups are utilizing stationary mixers more. And then automation is obviously on the forefront with technology going the way it is. There's a lot going on with automation right now too. Maybe didn't see quite as much of that as we thought we would, but it's definitely up and coming thing. So
yeah, tell me about each one of those. Tell me a little bit about what you saw with the processing. What do you mean by processing? What did you see out in the field?
Yeah, so what I'm talking about there is basically hammer mills and roller grinders and roller mills, I guess.
Were they doing hammer mills mostly or grinders, or what did you see? What was the thing that you saw?
Yeah, so definitely mostly hammer mills. I mean, hammer mills are a much more affordable option than some of these roller mills and roller grinders. Those are going to be significantly more upfront cost anyways. There's going to be less throughput out of those, but they basically consistently throughout the summer we saw that they were able to do a very good job. There's obviously some maintenance involved there, but they're pretty simple machines for the most part, and it didn't seem to be too big a deal, basically just replacing screens, making sure your hammers are all in good shape. And what that really does...
So the hammer mill was the one that was a little bit more prevalent?
For sure, the hammer mill is definitely more prevalent, yeah.
Was there a certain brand that you saw a lot of, or was that different in Iowa versus Wisconsin or other places, or what did you see?
So in northwest Wisconsin, I saw a lot of Winona hammer mills. I saw some Val metals scattered throughout the Midwest, all over the place where I went. In northwest Iowa, we saw some Sudengay, as well as some western Minnesota up there. We saw some Sudengay mills as well, and they all performed. They all got right down to that 400, 450 micron range with low standard deviations, as long as they were maintained well. And that was kind of the feedback from the farmers too. As long as they were maintained, they performed extremely well.
And that was all dry corn, right?
That was all dry corn that they were doing, yeah.
Yeah, did they say why they were grinding corn on farm instead of buying it? What was their motivation to grind on farm? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the farmers that did their own on-farm processing had a grain source outside of their local co-op. So they were able to use their own grain, have more consistency that way. They were able to control that grind. They weren't relying on the co-op to get the right grind size all the time. And then you don't have to bank at the co-op. You're able to do everything on farm. And obviously, I think $10 a ton is kind of a typical going rate for grinding at the mill for 5,000, maybe a little bit more than that machine. You can make up that cost of ground corn pretty fast when you're feeding 12 pounds of corn per day, feeding 100 tons per day. Yeah, it adds up pretty fast anyways. So
they had all their own storage on farm, most of those guys?
Oh, yeah, yep. So you had to have a significant amount of storage on farm for the most part to at least be able to grind out of your own bins or whatever. Yeah, yep.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about some of the stationary mixers that you saw. We haven't necessarily seen a lot of those in the Midwest. What did you see out there?
Yeah, so the stationary mixer setups I saw this summer were, like you said, there's not a lot until fairly recently. I think there's been a couple, but it's still not common, I would say.
Why do you think they put a stationary mixer in versus a mobile one? Do you have any idea why that might be?
I think a big part of it is kind of the wear and tear on these mixers. When you're driving around all the time, I think there's a lot of wear on these mobile mixers when you're driving around. And you can obviously, you can probably run multiple delivery trucks out of a single stationary mixer with one actual mixer product, which is less maintenance than 2 mixer products. There's obviously disadvantages there too, because if that goes down, what are you going to do? You're stuck. But you can improvise in other ways. But yeah, there's obviously some disadvantages there.
Did they have a backup mixer? Do you know?
They did not have a backup mixer on the farms I was at. No.
Oh, right.
No, but the mixers should be fairly.
They were fairly new, so they haven't needed a backup yet.
They haven't needed a backup. That might change at some point in time. These are both pretty heavy dairy areas too, where if they broke down, they could probably get a new mixer to make up something fairly fast. But yeah.
One of the places that I've seen some stationary mixers is when guys have 2 sites. I mean, they're looking for a delivery unit that can go on the road, that can deliver fast. Was that the situation with any of these guys? Did they have a multiple locations, or was it all pretty much single site? Do you remember?
So the one farm, when they built the stationary mixer setup, I believe they still only had one site, but they were now delivering to a second site, like you said. Yeah, I think it was 10, 15 miles away, so it was a good distance away. The other farm was a farm that had a site at one location, but because of county lines and stuff, they were maybe going to have to move a county over so that they wanted to have their feed center built right here, so they could ship it over and they could ship over there pretty easily if they had a delivery truck that goes on the road better than a TMR mixer. So.
Was there any downside from did those guys give you any downside? Or any downside that you saw from those stationary mixers?
Any downside to those stationary? Well, we talked about one bit. I think the biggest one, which probably is what we talked about. I don't know what the biggest, but one of the big ones is what we talked about. When that breaks down, what do you do? What do you go find another mixer? If you only have one mixer, though, that's a consideration with any TMR, I suppose. But
yeah, it's not really different than if you had a mobile, right?
No, probably not really any different than having a mobile that way.
You still got to have somebody that can bring out another unit if you need to have one, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Grow your skills as a leader and inspire change in your organization. As the speed, uncertainty, and complexity of global markets intensifies, leaders must develop the agility to confront uncertain times by engaging the workforce through vision, understanding, and clarity. What will it take to achieve all this? Well, as part of their brand promise to inspire change and grow leaders, GPS Dairy Consulting hosts a leadership blog on their website, where you'll find numerous articles and video blogs on the topics of innovation, technology, and data, feed fit, herd health and management, team building and employee management, as well as many others. Invest in your business by visiting the blog frequently, and feel free to include other leaders in your network. Read more under the blog tab at gpsdairy.com.
Tell me a little bit more about the automation that you saw out there. Was there anything that really stood out to you? What kind of automation did you see?
It's like I mentioned before, I didn't see nearly as much automation as I thought I might see this summer. But the one I did see was easy automation. And what that's going to do is it's not going to necessarily decrease your amount of time you just spend loading. It's going to just take just as much time as if you were going to go flip the switches on the bins yourself, basically. But it's going to take out all your human error. Not all, well, as long as you don't screw anything up with the computer.
Is running on it by itself? Explain to me the process a little bit. Like, what happened? How did it work? Go through that process, like step by step. Like, did they pulled up and then they hit a button, everything runs, or how did that work?
So it was actually a stationary mixer setup.
Stationary.
So it was loading directly into the bin, and yeah. So they would go, they would turn it on, it would go run. They could go face their silage pile. They could go stage forages. They could go do whatever else they needed to do in that 5-10 minutes it was loading, or whatever, 10-15 minutes probably that it was loading, and then they needed to come back to load forages, obviously, because it doesn't load forages. It can only load out of a bin or out of like a molasses or whey tank. But yeah.
Did they have any commodity shed, or was it all bins and forages? Is that kind of what you had, or
they had a commodity shed around it as well? Yeah. So there were some commodities like cotton. Obviously, doesn't always flow great. Stuff like that doesn't always flow great.
So they could load a lot of ingredients, but there were still a couple that they had to add at the end.
Yep. There were still some they had to add at the end.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah. How did they like that? Did they like the system?
Yeah, I think they really liked it for the most part. Yeah, they didn't have any complaints about it. Obviously, you need to have someone there that can handle the computer stuff, handle all the intricacies that go along with the automation system. Like everything else, it's going to have its issues. You got to address those as you go. You got to have someone that can handle that. But
so one thing about some of those systems that I've seen is they're able to be a little more precise, partly because they have some variable speed motors, correct? Is that right? They're going fast and then they slow down when they get close to the end. Is that correct? Is that how that's working?
Yeah, and then it can hit that closer every time than any human could. You're gonna get your load sizes closer than what a person could most likely. So yeah.
Yeah, fun. Sounds like you had a lot of fun this summer. Anything else that you learned, or anything else anything else that you found out or learned from the experience?
I had a blast this summer. It was a really good time all around. There hasn't been many times I've felt more challenged than this summer. I felt like I was going all summer. There was a lot of driving. I was all over the Midwest. I live in the middle of nowhere, so I was driving 7 hours to Green Bay, then 5 hours up to South Dakota, and all over the place. It was a fun, challenging summer. I mean, I couldn't start to tell you what I learned. It was just a great summer.
Well, thank you very much. We really do appreciate you having this summer, and best wishes in your vet school training. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation between Paul and Chaiden. I'm Peggy Coffeen from the Uplevel Dairy Podcast, serving as your host of the GPS DairyCAST, and thank you for listening to this episode.
The GPS DairyCAST features conversations that deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders. If this GPS DairyCAST has you looking for more ways to become an elite dairy producer, find more information in our show notes on how you can add a GPS advisor to your team.